shadows of the cathedral. I have delayed this confession for longer than reason allows, though reason itself has become an unreliable companion over the years. Time alters perspective, and memory, when stretched across centuries, begins to resemble architecture, layered, eroded, and reconstructed in ways that obscure its original form. Yet, there are certain structures within the mind that endure unchanged. For me, that structure is the cathedral. It stands still at the edge of the old quarter, where the streets narrow and the modern world seems reluctant to intrude. Even now, its towers rise above the surrounding rooftops, their spires etched against the sky like blackened quills. The facade is a masterpiece of Gothic devotion, intricate tracery, pointed arches and statues carved with such precision that they seem poised to speak, if only the silence would permit it. I first entered the cathedral under the pretense of scholarship. My name, at the time, was Leontius Venn. I was known as a historian of ecclesiastical architecture, drawn to forgotten places and neglected sanctuaries. The cathedral had long intrigued me, not only for its design, but for the peculiar absence of detailed records concerning its construction. It appeared suddenly in the historical record, fully realized, as though it had emerged from the earth rather than been built upon it. When I arrived, the city around it was quiet, cloaked in a thin veil of mist that softened the edges of stone and shadow. The main doors stood partially open, revealing a darkness within that seemed less like an absence of light and more like a presence waiting to be understood. I remember the moment I crossed the threshold. The air changed. It grew cooler, heavier, imbued with the scent of old incense and damp stone. My footsteps echoed faintly across the nave, each sound swallowed almost immediately by the vastness of the space. Above me, ribbed vaults stretched into shadow, their intersecting lines forming a geometry that guided the eye upward toward heights that the darkness concealed. Stained glass windows lined the walls, their colors muted by time. Even in daylight, they allowed only a dim illumination, casting fractured patterns across the floor like remnants of forgotten stories. I was not alone. At the far end of the nave, near the altar, a figure stood motionless. At first, I assumed it was a statue, another of the many carved forms that adorned the cathedral. But as I approached, the figure shifted slightly, and I realized my mistake. He was tall, dressed in garments that belonged to no specific era. His presence was composed, almost ceremonial, as though he existed in harmony with the architecture itself. "You have come to study," he said. His voice carried effortlessly through the space, neither loud nor soft, but perfectly measured. "I have," I replied, though even then I sensed that my purpose had already been understood. "There is much here to study," he continued, "but not all of it is meant to be recorded." I introduced myself, offering the credentials that had granted me access to so many other places. He listened without interruption, his gaze steady, reflective. "You may remain," he said at last. "The cathedral does not often receive visitors who seek understanding rather than spectacle." I thanked him, though I could not recall hearing of any caretaker or guardian associated with the building. Over the following days, I devoted myself to examination. The architecture was unlike any I had encountered. It combined elements of high Gothic aspiration with subtler, more intricate details reminiscent of later Renaissance design. The tracery of the windows formed delicate patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their precision, while the vaulting overhead created a sense of infinite extension. Yet there were irregularities. Certain corridors led to chambers that didn't align with the exterior structure. Staircases descended into levels that were not indicated in any existing plans. The cathedral was larger within than without, its geometry defying conventional logic. At night, these discrepancies became more pronounced. I had been granted a small chamber within the cloister, where I slept during the day and worked after sunset. It was then that the cathedral revealed its deeper character. The light changed. Candles placed along the walls burned with a steadiness that seemed unnatural, their flames unmoving even when the air shifted. Shadows lengthened and merged, creating forms that suggested movement where none should exist. And always there was the figure. He appeared without announcement, often standing at the edge of my vision, observing. "You notice the inconsistencies," he said one evening. "I do," I admitted. "The structure does not conform to known architectural principles." "It was not designed to," he replied. I set aside my notes. "Then what principle governs it?" He regarded me for a moment before answering. "Time," he said. The word lingered in the air. "Time does not pass here as it does elsewhere," he continued. "It accumulates. It settles within the stone." I felt a quiet unease, though I could not explain why. "And you?" I asked. "What is your role in this place?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I remember it," he said. It was not the answer I expected. Days passed, though the distinction between day and night grew increasingly blurred. The cathedral existed in a state of perpetual twilight, where the outside world seemed distant and irrelevant. My work began to change. Where once I had focused on measurements and documentation, I found myself writing observations that bordered on the abstract. The patterns in the tracery no longer appeared purely decorative. They suggested sequences, repetitions, cycles. The stained glass windows, when viewed at certain angles, revealed images that were not present in daylight. Figures, not depicted, but implied, watching. It was during one such observation that I realized something had altered within me. I had not felt hunger, not in the ordinary sense. Time had passed, days perhaps, but the physical needs that should have accompanied it were absent. My body felt unchanged, sustained by something I could not identify. I sought the figure. He was waiting in the nave, as though he had anticipated my question. "What have you done?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured upward, toward the vaulted ceiling. "The cathedral does not change those who enter it," he said. "It reveals what they already are." The implication settled slowly. "You mean?" "Yes," he said. There was no denial, no evasion. The realization did not come with fear, as I might have expected. Instead, it arrived with a strange clarity, as though a veil had been lifted from my perception. I understood then why the cathedral had drawn me, why its absence from records had intrigued me, why its doors had been open. "You are like me," I said. He inclined his head slightly. "We are bound to places such as this," he replied. "Structures that endure beyond the lives of those who build them." I looked around the vast interior. "And this cathedral?" "It was shaped over time," he said. "Not by a single hand, but by many, each leaving something behind." "And the inconsistencies?" "Layers," he answered. "Additions that do not replace what came before, but coexist with it." The metaphor was not lost on me. I began to see the cathedral differently, not as a building, but as an accumulation, a repository. Its walls held more than stone. They contained echoes of those who had passed through them, impressions that lingered and intertwined. And we, he and I, were part of that structure, not as occupants, but as elements. The confession I offer now is not one of regret, it is one of acknowledgement. I remained within the cathedral. I ceased to measure its dimensions and instead learned to navigate its deeper spaces. The hidden corridors became familiar, their shifting geometry no longer disorienting, but intuitive. Time lost its meaning. The outside world faded into abstraction. Occasionally, visitors would arrive, scholars, travelers, seekers. Most did not stay long. They felt the weight of the place and retreated, unable to reconcile its contradictions. A few remained. Not all were like us, but some were. They recognized something within themselves that the cathedral reflected. They stayed. The figure who had first greeted me no longer stood alone. We became custodians of memory, though not in the traditional sense. We did not guard the cathedral. It required no protection. We simply existed within it, as it existed within us. The shadows that move along its walls are not illusions. They are remnants, traces of moments that have not fully passed. If you stand within the nave at the right hour, though there is no true hour here, you may perceive them. Figures without form, voices without sound, they are not to be feared. They are part of the structure, as am I, as perhaps you may one day be. This is why I write, not to warn, not to invite, but to record. Because even in a place where time accumulates, there is value in acknowledging its passage. The cathedral remains. Its towers still rise above the city, though fewer now take notice. Its doors remain open, though few choose to enter. And within its vast interior, beneath vaults that hold centuries in quiet suspension, we continue, watching, remembering, becoming part of the architecture we once sought to understand. If you should ever find yourself drawn to such a place, do not dismiss the impulse too quickly. There are structures in this world that are more than they appear. And there are shadows that do not belong to the absence of light, but to the presence of something far older. I know this because I am one of them. And the cathedral, in its endless stillness, has never allowed me to forget.